here's the chart which gives you a general feel of the growth in the past decade. So, what's the characteristics of our self-financing sector? And I think Sherry has already, in her speech, has given you a brief analysis. It's about the nature, the teaching outcomes, level, mode of delivery, and duration, etc. So turn to our challenges. So basically, I think for the next decade, or for the next 10 years to come, you can see a sharp decline in our young people, in the population for young people, going into the tertiary or going to the post-secondary sector. So we can see that there are three main challenges that I think will be faced by the self-financing sector. That is, first, competition among the institutions and the need to fulfill students' expectations, and more importantly, to fulfill the community's expectations. So on competition among institutions, so you are very familiar with the projection. So I don't think I need to go into details. So what is the government policy on the self-financing sector? I think some of the speakers have already touched on this particular aspect. So I think in very brief terms, there are basically, in fact, two underpinning policies supporting our growth. In fact, the first one is the government is committed to providing quality multiple pathways for our young children to pursue the aspirations for post-secondary education. And so we have a parallel development of the publicly funded and self-financing post-secondary education sectors. And our institutions enjoy a high degree of autonomy and academic freedom for post-secondary institutions. And we're trying to enhance quality assurance, good governance, and the interests of students. And in fact, I think also some speakers have talked about the government's role in this particular regard. I think government played, well, there are three roles that government is playing. The first one is a supporter. So you can see that over the years, the government has provided a lot of, or has initiated some support measures to support the growth of the self-financing sector. And here are some of the examples. The land grant scheme, the stuff. I won't go into details because I'm sure that many of you are familiar with these schemes. So I will just very quickly go through these schemes, and you just have a feel of the support that has been given by the government. So although there may not be any recurring funding to support the self-financing sector, but the government does provide a lot of other supporting measures through various means. And the other role, also the research endowment fund and student finance. And the other role I believe that government is playing is the role of a regulator of the self-financing sector. Because, well, I think everyone will be aware that, well, we need to provide quality education. And although the self-financing sector is not receiving any direct or recurring subvention from the government still has the obligation to ensure that the quality or the programs provided by the self-financing sector is up to the expectation of the students and the community. So in this regard, we have different sorts of arrangements. That is the registration system under Cap 320 and the quality assurance framework, etc., etc. So the government plays the role of the regulator. So apart from the role of supporter, regulator, I think the government also plays the role of a facilitator to facilitate the growth of the self-financing sector, as well as to facilitate students' choice of post-secondary education. In fact, over the past few years, the government has been promoting the transparency of this, some transparency measures to be adopted by the self-financing sector to provide more information to students so that they can have an informed choice. They know what the programs are, they know what will be the intake number, the fees, the quality, etc., etc. So I think the third role of government is the role of a facilitator to provide all the necessary platforms so that the self-financing sector, that all the institutions could put the information, make the information available to the students so to ensure them to have an informed choice. So I think my presentation will stop here, and I will welcome further questions maybe after all the presentations.
Yes, thank you, Brian. We'll wait, we'll hold all the questions until the very end. That might be a little bit more efficient. So maybe I'll call upon Mr. Tim Lui, who is the chairman of the Committee on Self-Financing for Secondary Education, to share his views.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In my capacity as the chairman of that committee, I would just like to share with the audience the work of the committee so far and where we're going in the medium to long term. The committee was actually set up in April 2012. This was the product of the University Grants Committee. They published a report on the Higher Education Review 2010. And one of the recommendations was for the government to set up a committee to advise the government on the future development of this very important sector, the self-financing sector. That was taken on board by the government, and the committee was formed, and I was appointed the chairman back then. The committee comprises of a range of the members are from various backgrounds, clearly with operators in the self-finance sector, academics, member of the community, etc. So there's a good mix of people, and it really serves as a platform for issues to be surfaced and discussed. When we were formed, we quickly took a sort of a scan of the operating environment of the self-finance sector, in particular, taking into account a lot of the public comments, concerns, whether it's myths or misconceptions, because we really want to try and see where the landscape is and how we can improve it, because there has been a lot of negative connotation up to that point. And then we work out what we can do in the very short term that can create some impact. And we prioritize the areas of concern so that we have something which we can do quickly within 1 or 2 years of us setting up, something that we have to deal with on the medium term, and some matters on a longer term basis. So within the last 2 years, we have concentrated on a few areas. The first one is, as Brian said, I think it is important for the sector to enhance its transparency as well as access to information. So we had a good deliberation as to how we can do that. And at the end, after more than a year's effort, the concourse, the web-based platform, was launched, I think at the end of last year. And that hopefully would give both prospective students, parents, and other stakeholders one single platform that they can go to and be able to look up a lot of information, both on what the government policy would be, some of the incentives, some of the scholarship schemes, some of the regulatory framework, as well as access to all the websites of operators and the courses, etc. And in there, we try to put in a bit more information, like even references to students who have graduated, who have taken on different courses, and comments, because a prospective student will find it very useful to help them to try and judge which courses are more appropriate for them. So that is up and running. But we will be taking feedbacks clearly, because there must be enhancement that can be done to the system, and we'll do that as a matter of course. So that was our first important mission. The second one is we also recognize that there needs to be closer alignment between the industry and the institutions in the self-financing sector. So to this end, at the end of October last year, we held a very big conference, so to speak, back at the central government office, and about 400 people attended as well. We can't do everything in one single forum, but we picked 4 particular industries, and we put up the industry operators, companies in that industry, the providers of self-finance courses, put them up on the platform, have a very frank and candid discussion as to what the issues are, where the gaps are, and then a very interactive discussion with the audience as well. It was very clear to us that a lot of improvements can be made in terms of fostering more collaborative efforts between the industry and the service providers. So as I said, during that time, we only managed to deal with 4 particular industries, but there are clearly many more out there. So as a follow-up action, as Cherry said in her speech as well, we are now doing a series of follow-up actions to try and continue with that momentum, including surveys to employers, focus group meetings of students, and questionnaires to the operators as well, the institutions. Really try to find out how they come up with courses which are more relevant to the industry. Find out the gaps or the experience of the students who have graduated a year or 2 years from receiving the education, and how they feel in real life, whether the education is adequate or whether enhancement should be made. Now, of course, from the employers, it's very important to understand from them. Many people are doing it, but I think one more concerted effort from the committee, I think, will also be fine. And arising from that experience, hopefully we'll be able to draw up some good practices that are currently adopted by institutions already. And we will try and share that in a meeting with against our financial institutions on 24th of November. So that's what's happening. A third element of our work is really because we are also very concerned with improving the governance and the quality assurance of the institutions. And that's why we have engaged an external consultant to just have a literature review of local, regional, and overseas so-called good practices in terms of governance and quality assurance in self-financing sector in particular. The work has been completed, and if you have access to Concord, you will have Concourse, you will have noticed that the report and some of the executive summary are all loaded up there already. But there are good observations there and good recommendations coming up. And in terms of taking that matter forward, again, we'll be sharing the result of that particular study in our meeting on the 24th of November. And after taking consultation, we will also be coming up with a code of good practices on governance and quality assurance. So hopefully, it's a mandatory code, but hopefully institutions will be able to take that on, have a good look, self-reflection on what they're currently doing and where they should be heading. Of course, we can't be prescriptive across everything, but hopefully that will form as a good base for institutions to map themselves onto it and be better than that, hopefully. Right? The last thing is we as a committee also want to go out and reach out to institutions. So we have been embarking on a program of visiting institutions, trying to understand face-to-face, the operating issues, some of the matters, have a candid discussion on where they think the government might be able to help a bit more. So that will continue. So in a nutshell, work has been abundant, but it has been meaningful. We are only making a start, and we'll continue to work, and it needs the help and assistance of everybody in this room to make this sector even better than and now. So I look forward to hearing your advice on this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing the work of the committee with us. Now I call upon the Honourable Mr. Yip Kim Yuen, Legislative Councillor and Chairman of the Education Panel, to share his views with us.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for the invitation to this very important event. And firstly, I would like to congratulate all of you. It has been 20 years, and this is a long time. And thanks indeed very much to SFTE that I'm invited to this occasion. That I can save a lot of time, not necessarily to visit all the institutions. Of course, I would like to do so, but you know, this sector is becoming more and more important, and this is a very good opportunity for me to have direct interaction with all of you and to listen to all the inspirative views in this afternoon. And I think the importance of the sector by what has been introduced to you, all the figures, shows us that your success is very important. Your success means the success of the younger generation. Your success means the future success of the society at large. So this is very important job. My responsibility as a legislator, I think, is to look after the government, whether they are doing a good job to support you and to do all the things they should do. And I think that is also a very important job for of me and other colleagues international. And in case you need anything, please don't hesitate to approach us. And I think we all want to do all our best to support you to be successful in the future. And there are a lot of issues we have already touched on this afternoon. I think there are a lot of opportunities and also challenges ahead, and also in the past. The first thing, as a legislator, I think I would like to look into is really the role of government. This morning, Cherry was here, and this afternoon, Brian was here. So although this is a self-financed sector, we all know that government is never absent from the scene. Government is very important. And Brian just told us that there are two very important roles. One is supporting. Do you think the support from the government is adequate? No response. Oh, I think that is okay. For me, I think about Peter this morning just compare the differences between the U.S. community college and Hong Kong self-financed tertiary sector. And he said that the American system, the community college, received a lot of funding from the government. And thus they would provide, they would collect comparatively lower tuition fee than in Hong Kong. I think that makes a very big difference. In Hong Kong, whereby by the notion of self-finance, it means that the students have to pay most of the cost of their tuition. And it is for me, it is a difficult question to answer. Why those students who got into the UGC funded institutions received a lot of assistance, and while the students who are in the self-finance sector have to pay all the cost. Some even told me that the students, The students even told me that they have to pay for every brick of the building. And that means the cost structure itself, I think, is problematic. And although I think I have already witnessed that there are improvements in the support from the government in the past years. There are new measures introduced, but I think there are still rooms to improve. I think if we are talking about level playing field, the students in the self-finance sector should have also level playing field with those in the subvented sector. And this is echoed to Professor Chen's speech today, not only the institution level, but also at the student level. Now, although I understand that that involves a lot of money, and we do have financial constraint, but what I suggested that this is not a problem in theory. Theoretically, there is no problem at all. The problem is how we can resolve this at the practical level. Whether we have the money, whether we can deploy money wisely, and so on, or to what extent we can do better. This is not a matter whether we should do it or not. It's not a matter of principle. The second issue would be, Brian also told us that it is a regulating issue, monitoring issue. This is also very important for legislators, whether the self-financed institutions are doing jobs satisfactory not only to themselves but also to the public. Although this is self-financed, but actually you see the government is contributing more and more, including land and all sorts of funding. And this is on one hand. The other thing is, this sector is becoming more and more important for the young people who are our assets, who are our future. So because of that public interest, I think that already provides a very good reason that the government has to take care of the well-being of the institutions. And just in a few days before, we had a meeting in the electrical education panel. We talked about this monitoring issue. I think the government is very kind, and it is now introducing the code of practice, I think, something like that. That is for self-regulating. So institutions will come together. I think this may be a very good platform, and decide what we should follow, what kind of standard we have to achieve, what kind of code of practice we should follow. I think the consultancy report just now mentioned by Tim also touched on these issues. But we cannot avoid another issue, is that besides self-regulating, the external regulation is also important. Just like in Hong Kong, primary school or secondary schools has to be regulated by the education ordinance. And we have a higher education ordinance, Cap 320. And I think it is necessary for us to look into that and to update that. That is also important. So we have to distinguish two parts. As self-financed sector, I think self-regulating is very, very important. And besides, we also need external regulating from the government. But we don't want the external regulation to be too extensive. So we have to confine, but very clearly state what should be regulated by the government. And for the other parts, I think we can leave to the institutions to to do your own, to develop your own code of practice, and I think that it would be very well. The third issue, I think, is Brian also told us that it is facilitating. To facilitate more choices. I have been thinking about what is the best for the younger generation, because the existence of this sector is for the good of the students, right? What do they need? They come from different backgrounds, and they have different interests. They have different strengths, and they need to develop in different fields to meet the different needs of the society in the future. So, how the self-finance sector can diversify itself in different courses of study, I think that is also very important. Cherry this morning just mentioned the vocation study, and this might be one of the things we have to think about, because nowadays you have comprised 70% of the age group. 70%, that means the majority of the age group. And if most of them are engaged in the so-called pure academic study, I think it's quite difficult to embrace all the whole population. So I think how to make ourselves more diversified to cope with the differentiated needs of the students and the differentiated needs or the diversified needs of the society. I think is very important. That's the end of my.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, now I invite Dr. Richard Armour from UGC to talk on this public sector perspective.
Thank you. Yep. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I thank you very much. Can I also add my congratulations to those of everybody to the FSTE for his birthday. Congratulations, and I'm delighted to have been invited today. I should start with an apology and a lesson to me, and therefore to all of us. If you're ever invited to an event like this, don't speak at the end of a long line. I started off with 17 bullet points. 15 and a half have been covered by my colleagues, and so I'm left with 1.5. And I'll have to work on my creativity. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit. Let me begin by saying I'm very optimistic. I know there are some demographic challenges ahead of us, but I'm very optimistic. We have an extraordinarily robust post-secondary education sector. We have a strong public sector, and I would add we've got a very strong self-financing sector. I think we are all to be congratulated, because I'm very privileged to have served 10 years in the Open University, as well as 8 years in the publicly funded sector before I joined the dark side. Mrs. J has gone, so I can say that. Brian is right. So I think to try and get salvage what I've got from my few remarks. Higher education, I believe, is undergoing a period of dynamic transition right throughout the world. In Hong Kong, we see a remarkable expansion, particularly driven through the self-financing sector. The UGC, or the publicly funded sector, has stayed flat. The self-financing sector has been the engine of growth this last 20 years, and that's been of enormous credit to many of the individuals in this room and their predecessors. And so that makes today's forum a very timely event for stakeholders to come to share their views and insights in the development of the sector and its impact on higher education as a whole. Now, since I've got no more figures to trot out or to talk about various dimensions, what I'll try to do is to look forward, because the theme is the way forward. And I will try and do a little bit of prediction of what the characteristics of our sector, the higher education sector in totality, will be going forward. And that's what I'll try and do. I don't claim to have any crystal ball, but I'll try and see what I think some of the characteristics might be. I believe that the government has made a clear policy signal that it supports a parallel or integrated development of the publicly funded and the self-financing post-secondary education sectors. These two sectors complement one another, and they're both important players in keeping our higher education sector competitive in the global arena, because it's an increasingly globalized world, as we all know. And I believe that this is our way forward. Collaboration, which also goes hand in hand with competition. I'll come back to that later. I believe that the growth of the self-financing provision alongside the older publicly funded provision provides plurality in our higher education sector, and this is very important. I believe that the total universe of higher education institutions in Hong Kong can each differentiate, as Ip Kip Yoon just talked about, by attending to what they're best at. We don't all need to be global research-intensive higher education providers. If you can imagine a Cartesian diagram where one axis is global, emphasis on global as opposed to local, and the other emphasis is on research as opposed to teaching, there are 4 quadrants. And we can map all of our institutions in each of those 4 quadrants. We don't all have to be in that global research-intensive quadrant. In fact, if we were, Hong Kong would be deeply in trouble, in my view. So I think we can work together to place ourselves in that quadrant, and that's to Hong Kong's economic future, I believe. So Tim's talked about some of the things where the UGC is helping with the sector in terms of the financial transparency of the self-financing operations within the UGC institutions, and I think that will help management councils address some of the previous concerns. I think that in all of our sectors there's always the question of quality standard, and that's the risk. There's always a risk which we all have to address. It doesn't necessarily have to be in one's own institution or one's own program. The whole sector, the whole of Hong Kong can be, reputational risk can happen because of one program in one institution. So the sector has to work together to make sure, we keep each other safe. So we're working together, the UGC, JQRC, and the HKC APQ, to try and work out what is the best way going forward to make sure our quality assurance is in the right hands. Collectively, we're a small jurisdiction with lots of quality assurance protocols. I think we can simplify and make them more efficient, and we're working with all the bodies to try and make sure that happens. Now, we've talked about, Brian and Cherry talked about some of the research funding schemes that we're rolling out for the self-financing institutions. Perhaps too little, too late, but it's happening, and so let's look on what we can do together going forward. And I think the UGC is very happy to be involved in partnership with the self-financing sector, both in these research schemes alongside our publicly funded research schemes as well. So I think with other higher education systems across the world, we have an important mission of nurturing globally competitive students equipped with the capacity to cope with challenges of a totally dynamic and changing world, preparing students for multiple careers. As Professor Chen said today, we're not training students simply for one career that they'll fulfill for 30, 40 years. They could change careers many times. We've got to prepare students for change, for adaptability, for lifelong learning, all of those key challenges. The world is not the same as it was 50 years ago. To maintain our international presence in the sector as a whole, each institution has to develop their differentiated niche areas. As I said, it's unrealistic to expect all of us to be comprehensive universities with global rankings in all disciplines. I believe that whilst we as a sector can be collaborative, we can, our other characteristic as well as collaboration can engender better and more efficient credit transfer, both vertically and horizontal, among our sectors as seamlessly as possible, as easy as possible, to allow students to move between and among our institutions, between and among programs. That should be another characteristic that we try and create. But as alongside that collaboration, there will always be competition. I don't see collaboration and competition, although it seems like a paradox, I don't see them as natural tensions. I think it makes for a healthy, pluralistic system which will in the end make for a rich higher education environment. Thank you again, colleagues, and thank you, Chairman, for inviting me.
Thank you, Richard. We now move on to Professor William Lee of HKCABQ, the organization whom we have this love-hate relationship. William.
Thank you, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, as Richard says, when you're sort of the end tail of the line, I have all these notes and it's been covered by all our esteemed speakers and then we throw it away. I came from the dark side. I would say. And now I'm in the private sector. Obviously, throughout today, the Hong Kong CABQ name was mentioned in context as well as in, well, I wouldn't say not so good context. It may be a less understanding context. Let me just step back and talk about, I understand as we go on the next few years, the numbers are declining, everybody's kind of nervous. I think keynote speakers have given sort of prescription. You gotta find your niche, you gotta find your strength, you need to look ahead and teach students that are able to deal with all these challenges. I tell you something, I took this job about 13 months ago, and I've been traveling, reading many QA bodies. Hong Kong stands out in Asia in terms of quality program, recognition, trust, confidence. It's a lighthouse. It's a lighthouse. In other words, we shine. We are looked at in par with TESA Australia, QAA. And many Europeans QA bodies. As a matter of fact, I understand the EDB is doing some benchmarking, which is a good thing because it put us up there. So despite the fact that yes, the next few years are going to be very challenging, indeed it will be because it will shake us, the sector out. Maybe it's good because as some of us have said, there's too many clustering in certain discipline. Maybe it's good to spread it out, to touch on things that we are not comfortable with, but was in the past, but somehow it took off, but we're going to try it again. That is very important. I mean, I'm not going to repeat the keynote speech and all these things. We're going to look at ourselves and find, that's great stuff. But I'd like to tell you that Hong Kong is looked at that lighthouse in the darkness of QA and quality and higher post-secondary education in Asia. Trust me, I've talked to many people. Underlying all these challenges is obviously, and we touch upon that, is a robust QA body. Robust. Not just say Hong Kong CABQ is coming, it starts with you as the educator. Conscientious about the quality of the program, the type of student that you're going to be training, what are they good for, as an employer receptive, they always complain, don't worry about it, not only typical in Hong Kong, in Europe and everywhere, employers always complain. But you do your job in relation to the outcome that you have stated, the linkage of the industry. I can guarantee you those graduates will find their footing. What is our role? What is my role? My role as the Hong Kong CABQ is to facilitate that. I've talked, since I came on board in the past year, I've talked to many of the senior management of operators. I've gone to dinner with them. My role is to facilitate you. You're going to meet challenges. Listen, you have challenges. Don't you think I have challenges? We're self-funded also. No, we don't make profit. We are self-funded. You do well, EQ will do well. We are in this together. Don't say, oh, the VQ. No, we're not. We are in the same. Obviously, my role and my jurisdiction is to ensure quality, to ensure that the program meets standards, as in the QF, maintain the QI, its integrity, so that employer, whether they use it or not, that's one thing. At least overseas regional, they look at this qualification, may come from the UGC sector or the non-UGC sector, that they say they have trust in this, they can articulate and move on. This is what we were talking about. So see us as your partner. Okay? As a partner, in arms, to forge through this darkness until the light comes out again. Now, since I came on board in the past 12, 13 months, as I said, one of the things is to talk to my stakeholders, what are their challenges. Also, I review some of our strategic plan, how to do our things better. All right. I hear complaints about it's very complicated. Trust me, there are more complicated systems out there. The complication, as you call it, is to instill confidence in people, not only within ourselves, but overseas. And they say, this is a robust system, there are check and balances. And that's what we want to see. Now, are we sort of held by this system? No. As the QA, as we evolved, as higher education evolved, the process will evolve. It will. Trust me. All right. And so I want, as I said, I want to work in partnership with you. We are looking at ourselves. We're talking to you, talking to the government. We are all partners. As all these little parts, we put them together. We talk maybe different levels, but we're all talking as a whole thing. Right. And so my message to you, the way forward, is that I understand the challenges. Your challenges is also my challenge, and I look forward to working with you. As Richard says, one of the things that we are doing also is to work among the three bodies and see how we can streamline things, better definition. We're not competitors. We are complementing each other as a whole higher education in Hong Kong. I'll stop here, all right, and I'll listen to you.
Thank you, William. And last but certainly not the least is Professor Wang San, who is currently the president of Open University. He also, of course, comes from the dark side previously. And now has to find money to sustain their programs on OU. So he probably can share some good insight from his experience.
Thank you. Well, being the last and also least speaker, the good thing is I have the opportunity to listen to all the speakers. But the pain is, even the joke was taken by Richard Arnold. Because I also prepare, some points to follow, but I found most of the thing I want to say has been said. So I changed my mind. I just want to say one thing. And this is simple, but I think it's very important. This thing is the finance of self-finance institution for undergraduate studies. Now I repeat, mainly for undergraduate studies. It may not be so relevant for associate degree providers. If you want to make it more stimulating, I would put it not finance, but financial viability. Financial viability of self-finance institution for undergraduate degree. Well, I just listened to Brian Rowe, our government official, talking about now we have 38.4% of participants rate of degree and 70% of tertiary education. Now this is a big achievement. Now we are celebrating 20th anniversary, slightly earlier, later than 20th anniversary, I think in the late 1990s. At that time, we were doing education reform. So Mr. Tung Chi-hua, the former chief secretary, announced that he wants to move the participation rate from 18% to 60%. Now, at that time, a lot of people laughed at him. He must be crazy. How can it be done so quickly in 10 years? But now, in slightly less than 10 years, we were now in 70%. So no matter what, no matter how much difficulty we still have ahead of us, how much problem we have, I think we have to be congratulated to ourselves. Because in Hong Kong, we are moving towards to knowledge economy. We are in the era of lifelong learning. And Hong Kong has nothing, no resources except human resources. There is no choice for us. So we could be achieving this in a short period of time. I think this is good. I think we should not have any regret. But who is going to pay for this 70%? Now government is paying the 18% or 20% of the UGC. The money is about $17 billion a year, which is not small amount. And Hong Kong government is spending over 25% of its government expenditure on education. Again, it's not a small amount. Now, I'm not shoe-shining Cherry or Brian Low. I think government has done a lot. So, if we want to increase the participation rate of our tertiary education, I think this should be the overall responsibility of the whole society. Of course, government has to play the major role, but the other stakeholder, the business sector, parents, students, also have to pay. Otherwise, we could not achieve. And under this kind of thinking, therefore, the government is pushing for setting up self-finance or private, I think sometimes we call private is easier, institution for tertiary education. I think this is logical. So that's point number one. Okay. However, point number two, if we look into the history of the development of higher education in other developing countries, okay, we choose US as Peter and is always choosing US. You look in the US is a country with a short history. They start their higher education maybe 250 years ago. They set up private colleges, private institutions, okay? And after many years, they train students, they gain their names, they set up endowment, they become prestigious universities, and because of this, they start to do research, and they attract research money. So if you go to look at all the prestigious universities in the US, they rely resources from three sources: tuition, endowment, and research funding. No government direct block grant like us. But they can do it because they have accumulated more than 250 years. You go to Yale, you go to Harvard, you go to Brown, Princeton. They survive very well because they have a good name. Even some students they could not pay, they would offer scholarships. And they could, I've done some statistic. About 30 years ago, Yale, Harvard, they only charged $8,000 to $9,000 US per year tuition fee. But 30 years later, now when you check the tuition, it's $58,000 per year. So it's more than 6 to 7 times. Now even increase so much, still lots of people fighting to get in because their reputation, because of their history, all reasons. And the US, after doing the private university, then they started public university about 100 years ago. University of California, and then later on State University of Florida. Those are second tier. So they accept less good students compared to Harvard or MIT. And they charge less because government gives subsidies. So this is a relation. I think the system is quite coherent, harmonically. They have a first tier private university, charge high fee. They don't have to rely on the government. And the second tier, they need government support. They accept not the first tier student, they accept much lower fee. So this is a scenario. However, in Hong Kong, we are just opposite. You could say this is a mismatch. We start public university first, the 8th public university, and it costs 17 billion a year. And each student costs about $200,000, which is almost the amount of the top university elsewhere. But they still charge 42,000 tuition fee over the past 20 years. No increase because of political reason or whatever. So it's a kind of a mismatch, right? Then, because of this, we want to increase the participation rate to 70%. So we set up all the self-finance or private institutions and asking them to have the operating budget of $50,000 to $60,000. I don't agree with Professor Edward Cheng. He said it's enough. I don't think it's enough. I was working in HKUST before. It's a research university. Now I'm working at Open. I know the difference. But even at Open University, you need to have adequate amount. Professor William Lee is talking about the lighthouse. Lighthouses, you need energy and power. So we still need this power. And Cherry is saying that we have to be less reliant or self-reliant. In Chinese, it's called 自力更生. I fully agree. But the Chinese also said, 巧婦難為無米之炊. That means even experienced housewife could not cook a good meal without good material, right? So I think there are issues, dilemmas. Because for self-finance institution, we cannot charge high fee because our student is not a top-ranked student. And many of them, family background is not very high, I mean not very well off. But we also have to maintain the quality. Maintain the quality of the program, facilities. And then we don't have government subsidies. So this is really a difficult thing. So what to do? I know you tell me 2 minutes. I will finish before 2 minutes. So what to do? I'm thinking of recently, government has done one thing that's very good, called SSSDP. This is to provide some subsidy to the self-finance institution which has social relevance or relevance to economic development. I think this program is very good. It could expand a little bit. Now, UGC now is 1. Self-financing institution is 0. 1 and 0 is too much contrast. I think we got to do something in between. Maybe it's 0.5 or 0.4. Even 0.2 would be helpful. This 0.2 is an important rubricant to help the self-finance institution. Now, the reason why I'm saying is we have so many self-finance institutions coming up, which is really helping Hong Kong, helping us to raise up the participation rate. We should maintain it. But in order to maintain it, there is certainly some gap. We still need some lubricants. And I think SSSDP or other kind of, such as moving some of the top-up degree from UGC to self-finance institution. I mean, the government could think about it. I treasure the government has made tremendous investment already, as I mentioned. 17 billion is a lot of money. But in order to survive and excel for the self-finance institution, we need a little bit feel, from the government to help. And I'm confident the government will have wisdom to think how to do it. It's not a lot of money, just small amount of money as a tipping point to help this institution to excel. Thank you.
I'd like now to open up for questions from the floor. I think 6:26 now, maybe we allow about 15 minutes for this and then we see how things go. We have some microphones around, I think. So, yes, Enoch, Professor Young.
I had a very short comment. I was very impressed by both Richard William and my good friend Wang San about the lighthouse and the field. I think we should use solar energy. The question is, who is going to provide the solar panel? I think the government should provide the solar panel. And then you can have self-generated energy. Thank you.
Let's take in a few and then we'll invite the panel to respond collectively. There's a hand over there.
I have two simple questions. One for the Honorable Mr. Yip, and the other one for Mr. Lo, the Deputy Secretary for Education. First question. Well, just now during one of the breakout sessions, one of the speakers seemed to put an equation mark between running self-financed education and business. And I'd like to hear your views on this, whether we can actually run education like we run a business. The other question is for Mr. Lo. We know some community colleges or similar entities are affiliated to universities. So I'd like to know, does the government encourage or rather discourage this affiliation? Thank you.
So we'll take a few more before we invite the panel members to respond. Yes, John. Microphone.
Thanks, John Cribb in Hong Kong Space. I think there's a sort of philosophical issue for the self-financing sector and government in regulation. Government has wanted the market, as it were, to provide places for our young people that it is not prepared itself to pay for, and yet it extensively regulates the sector. We're asked to do business with one hand behind our back, and I do have a sort of question about that, because most businesses are allowed to work here in Hong Kong on a laissez-faire basis, just with a level playing field, whereas we feel that that's not the case for education. I think we can accept that education is perhaps different. It's too important to be left completely to the market. And of course, in saying that, we must recognise that the vast majority of the sector, and certainly I think most of the people here, are not for profit as well as self-financing. So we must bear that in mind. I agree with the Honourable Mr. Yip, who said that regulation should be not too extensive. I think it also should not be too expensive. And the government ought to pay for the regulation. HKC, BQ, JQRC, etc. That is a financial burden to the sector. The government, if we want the market to be successful, if we want regulation, then please pay for it.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have some comments, or kind of questions also. Summing up all the points here from the speakers, actually we see that our sector has grown a lot. We have also instituted lots of QA mechanisms. We have tried to make the sector more transparent and all that. I think now we need to move on to the second stage, where I think instead of just having more numbers and more kind of negative QA, we should think of ways how to boost the sector in terms of elevating its status, further improving the quality, so that they are being perceived as strong institutions of higher learning. I think that is something we need to look into. And that, I think, comes back to what we have just mentioned here, is dollars and cents. So the energy for us to shine. So there are a number of areas here. One is the capital cost. So right now, we take out loans to build all these campuses, and then we have to repay government, and the money comes from fees. There's nowhere else. So that's one thing. So if government just write off all the loans, I think that would be a good help.
Sure, we will support that.
That's one thing. The other thing is what Yuxan mentioned is subsidy schemes. Right now it's provided only to 4-year programs, but I think there's an even greater need for sub-degree programs. We talk about this vocational orientation, linking with industry. All these are very expensive, lab-based, space-intensive type programs. So why just give it to 4 years? I think there's even a greater need to give it to sub-degrees, as well as to top-up degree programs. So if you have these sub-degree programs, you also want to provide opportunities for students to articulate to. So I think currently we limit it to 4-year programs. I think that is also unsatisfactory. But I know it's a pilot, but I think government should consider expanding that. These are my comments. So now I invite the panelists to respond. Maybe government, okay.
First good question was directed to me, so in answering the question whether self-financing is equivalent to doing business, I tend to agree with Professor Chen this afternoon. He said that the educational model of, he talked about the private sector when you are asking for private donation. If you are doing just business, how are you going to attract private donation? So the self-financing model doesn't equivalent to business model. But I think this is one part of the answer. The other part is if you're doing self-financing, you have to be very sensitive to the market, the needs. What is demand from? What is expected from the market? So market is not. Market is a little bit different from business, because market is about supply and the supply and demand. But when we are talking about business, it's about profit. So responsive doesn't mean you are chasing for profit. So I think that is the crucial difference. And self-financing, if you achieve a very good self-financing status, I think the beautiful part is you achieve independence. You are independent of external control. I think PTU, I come from PTU, we are self-financing. And so we can be free from external control, including government, including other control. So this is very important. And if you have your own educational mission, I think self-financing is something very good.
Brian?
Okay, thank you. I would like to make 2 points. Although I'm trained as a bureaucrat, I hope I don't talk like a bureaucrat on the defensive. First, I very much like Professor Enoch Yang's proposition that solar energy and solar panels. In fact, I think this is exactly the direction that we are moving in terms of supporting the self-financing sector. We do not provide recurrent funding to self-financing sector, otherwise they will become subvented organizations. So that's point number one. And in fact, in my earlier presentation, you can see the various supporting schemes, say the startup loan scheme or the land grant scheme. These are exactly the kind of solar panels we are building, we are providing for the self-financing sector. So in this way, we hope that while the government does not provide direct subvention, recurrent subvention to the self-financing sector, we do try to support the sector's growth healthily. So we provide different kinds of schemes to support the growth of the sector. And another question is about the community college thing operated by the UGC-funded institutions. That's problematic, honestly. In fact, when I understand that a lot of speakers talk about level playing field, we need to put it in the right perspective. When we talk about level playing field, don't try to mix up the subvented sector, the UGC-funded institutions, running programs subvented by the government, and the self-financing activities operated by the UGC-funded institutions. So when we talk about level playing field, we are not talking about the UGC-funded programs. There are different kinds of animals. We are talking about whether there should be level playing field between those self-financing activities operated by the UGC-funded institutions and the self-financing sector. So when we talk about level playing field, I think we need to compare these two different groups of institutions. So in this regard, well, I share some of your concerns that whether we are having a level playing field. In this regard, I understand that Richard, the UGC Secretary, has been monitoring very closely about the deployment of government resources by the UGC-funded institutions to their self-financing activities. In fact, we have separate accounts, we have separate systems monitoring the kind of activities so as to ensure that there will not be any cross-subsidy from the government funding to these self-financing activities. Of course, nothing is 100% waterproof. To be very honest, there must be some advantage of the UGC-funded institutions self-financing arm because they could use the brand name of the UGC-funded institutions. So, while accepting this sort of advantage, as a government, we also try to, as far as possible, provide a level playing field by treating them the same. So in this regard, I don't know whether I have answered the question posed by some of the audience that what's the government's position in UGC-funded institutions operating community college or so. And in fact, I recall that in an earlier higher education review report, the UGC actually recommended that there should be a separation of community college from the UGC-funded institutions. While whether the format, how, or to what extent that sort of separation means, I think there could be a different level. As far as the government is concerned, I think we stick to the principle that there should not be any sort of cross-subsidy. I think that's the bottom line. So I don't know whether I answered the question.
Can I make a clarification? Thank you. What I just mentioned, suggesting that government could consider to give some subsidies, definitely it is not a subvented grant. Otherwise, become UGC institution again. I mean, I'm not meaning that. It's only a subsidy. And the reason is because although we apply it theoretically, market economy, we could raise our fee. We don't have enough operating grant, right? But in reality, we cannot because our students are coming from not so well-off family, so you cannot really increase the fee too much. And we are not like US prestigious private university could raise very high. That's why, in order to make sure that you have adequate operating fund to maintain the quality, the government could consider to give a small amount, of this kind of subsidy. And point number two, now the SSSEP is only giving subsidy to students. I think maybe I'm not politically correct. So this amount could be, some of them could be given to the institution, because the institute do not have enough operating fund to guarantee the quality. And if the quality is guaranteed, eventually the beneficiary is go to the student, right? So I'm thinking that maybe the government could think about that to help. This is my clarification. Thank you.
You want to follow up? A
Yes,
quick one.
yes,
Yes.
a quick one. Well, thank you, Mr. Low, for attempting to answer my question. But if I I remember correctly earlier today when your subordinate, Mrs. Shen, talked about how the government is subsidizing BTC. She used the expression historical legacy. So with due respect, I slightly suspect that the government is practicing double standards.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe some last word from our panel members. William or Richard, you want to have last word? Tim? Maybe Brian then?
Well, I having heard a lot of speakers, having heard a lot of comments from the floor, obviously the government feels the sentiment of the self-financing sector. Yeah. Well, I don't need to deny that. But it is true that there is historical legacy, both for the UGC funded sector or the VTC. Yeah, to be very honest. And I think that for the self-financing sector, the government's position remains that while the government is providing, say for example, for degree places, at present 15,000 first degree places by government funding, and we provide subvention to VTC to operate sub-degree programs. But as time changes, these institutions see the need for developing other programs. And at the same time, I think the market also sees the need for developing an alternative pathway for our youngsters to pursue higher education. So at the same time, so there are both degree and sub-degree programs operated by the self-financing arm of the community college of the UGC funded institutions, as well as by the other self-financing institutions. We can see that this has happened and is happening. But as a government, our policy is that for subvented sector, we have an obligation to provide funding, to provide quality education to our youngsters. And at the same time, the institutions have the responsibility. There's no free lunch. Well, we give them the money. They have the obligations. They have to deliver. They have to comply with a lot of things. Although institutional autonomy, academic freedom, these are the two guiding principles. Still, the UGC-funded institutions, when they receive subvention from the government, they have their responsibilities and they have to comply with a lot of quality checks, certain standards. I'm sure that Richard's team has been monitoring our UGC-funded institutions very closely. And at the same time, the self-financing sector, although do not receive any subvention from the government, they enjoy a certain degree of autonomy, a very large degree of autonomy. And although I'm sure that our legislator, in fact, asked the government to monitor the self-financing sector more closely to ensure, in particular, I think, the quality of education to be provided by the self-financing sector. I think the fact is, there is some sort of different treatment between the subvented sector and the self-financing sector, and we're trying to deal with the self-financing arms and the community college very, very carefully. And I think we will work with the UGC Secretariat very closely to make sure that we maintain a level playing field well as no cross-subsidy from UGC activities to the self-financing arm. It may not be that easy, but I'm sure that, well, I can assure you that, well, we and the UGC are trying very hard to achieve this in order to maintain that sort of level playing field.
Thank you. Maybe there's 1 minute, okay?
Brian just talked about electrical's intention to monitor more closely. I think we focus more on the governance, and that is some crucial part. That is a crucial part, but not so extensive in my personal view. And that is one thing. The second is about the idea of solar panel. I think that is a very nice one, but better for university.